Good evening, everyone. Appreciate everyone being here this evening. We are going to continue our study in Genesis. You might remember last time we left off after verse 26 in chapter 19. So we're going to pick up there and go through the last of this chapter. So it'd be Genesis 19, verse 27. And I've titled this Aftermath of Sin. Pretty obvious reasons for that, I'm sure. The results of our sin and our decisions, what will occur if we are not following the Lord. And this is a cautionary account of what becomes of people when they are not following the Lord, when we expose ourselves to the world's corruption and begin to partake of it. Our decisions carry consequences and effects beyond the acts themselves. So I want us to look at these things in that light as we go through the last of this chapter. So let's start looking at our text here, Genesis chapter 19. We'll start in verse 27. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. So Abraham sees the devastation of these cities, and he knows that not even 10 people were found to preserve those cities. And that's probably kind of a sad realization and moment for him thinking about that. Now, he knows that God saved Lot. He trusted God in that. So I don't think he was worried about that at all, but this would still be a sad sight for him. He had saved some of these people earlier when they had been taken by those other kings. To us, this shows the devastation of sin, the result of sin. Sin has a high price when we continue in it purposefully, when we accept it and just live in sin on purpose. When we allow it to corrupt us and then we just accept it as a way of life. And it reminds me of this warning, which I'm pretty sure I've probably used before, but sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost more than you want to pay. So the problems with sin that this kind of warns us of, sin usually escalates. When it says take you farther than you want to go, it usually escalates. It may start small. You may think some minor thing, a minor sin, but usually when you start partaking of things like that, it's going to grow. It's going to escalate beyond what you intended. And then on keeping you longer than you want to stay, well, we call it being free from the bondage of sin for a reason. Sin tends to trap us or bind to us, right? It becomes a habit that can be difficult to break in some cases. And sometimes, if we're honest, the sin somehow becomes enjoyable, and then we could become bound to it in that way too. And that can be, again, hard to stop and get away from. Now, the consequences of sin, if we look at the third part there, cost you more than you want to pay. The consequences of sin can be way more devastating than we expect or think. We may think, well, for one, the wages of sin are death if you go to that extent. But sometimes you may just do like maybe a small lie or something like that, something you think is small or minor, and you create a situation where you're forced into more deception or more sin over and over, and it just becomes this huge mountain of like lies or deception or whatever the sin is, can be whatever. And then when you're found out, it can be devastating to your reputation. It can hurt your friendships and your relationships with the people that you've been sinning against or lying to, however that goes. So it can really cause you a lot more trouble than you think, especially when it grows like that. And that's just from a sin that some of us might think of as a lesser sin when I'm talking about this. But all these reasons are why all sin is really equal. There isn't really a lesser sin or a worse sin. Any sin can draw you in, whatever you're tempted by, and it can really take hold of you in that way. So And James mentions it this way. If we look at James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So notice the temptations are not from God. These are our desires, our temptations. They're within us. So when we give into it, it becomes sin. So the idea is that the temptation itself is not a sin. We're going to have temptations in this life. I may be tempted for any number of reasons, for anything, but if I resist and do not act on that temptation, then I have not sinned. Jesus was tempted in all ways, but never sinned. So because he never acted on it. So if we act like Jesus and realize we're going to have these temptations, prepare ourselves for them with the word, and then don't act on those things, right? But act on other good things instead. So then notice that when the sin is full grown, which means we didn't just give into it one time and repent, but when we gave into it and then we kept doing it and we kind of accepted it, and it becomes a full grown part of our life. When it's full grown, then it brings forth death. That's where the wages of sin or death comes into that. And when we choose to live in sin purposefully, that wage will be paid, which we don't want. So if we come back to our verses 27 and 28, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place. Did I read that already? Let me look back. I'm sorry. Yep, I did. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, so this is the result for Sodom and those other cities. They reaped what they sowed, and they received those wages that nobody really wanted them to receive. So we want to remember this ourselves. It's a cautionary account for us. There is a hell. There is a lake of fire. We don't want anyone to go there. So instead of acting out our selfish desires, find a way to replace those with good, helpful things where we can love others in deed as well as in word. Be what I think of as being a good guy in life, right? And reap the blessings that you sow from being, one of the good guys. For all the trouble in this life, if we do have trouble, it can be a great life. When we follow the Lord, there are a lot of blessings in that are ours. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Notice that God remembered Abraham as he saved Lot. The only righteous one there that we know of, or that was mentioned, was Lot. And so he was saved. He's Abraham's nephew. So God had multiple reasons to save Lot, but part of his reason is he remembered his friend Abraham. So it's important for us to realize how God thinks of us. He does good things that we may not even be aware of for us. I call that providential care, where God is doing things that we don't necessarily know about. He blesses us through so many things in so many ways. He does them for us because he cares. Even when things look bleak, when things seem hopeless, God thinks of us and helps us. We just may not see it or know it ourselves. So God saved Lot because he believed in God. Lot believed in God and was counted as righteous, but also because he was Abraham's nephew, and Abraham was God's friend. Now, Lot's story overall is pretty sad, but it comes about because of his decisions, the things he's done. Why did he choose to live in that sinful place, Sodom? Why did he choose to live there? Did he not know how that was going to affect his family, his daughters, his wife? You can't live amongst the people who are all like that without that having some negative effect. And as I mentioned in the past, he did seem to be trying to bring out some change for them. It says he was sitting in the gate. If you go back to verse 9, you can see where some of the men of Sodom said that he was basically trying to be a judge on them. He was trying to get them to change their ways. So Lot may have had a noble intent or cause, but he should have been also more aware, watchful for his family than to stay and keep them in such a situation. All these sinful things must have had some bad influence on his family. Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Now remember that Lot made a big deal out of going to Zoar and not fleeing to the mountains. And so the Lord let him flee to Zoar, spared that city, because originally the Lord was going to destroy that city as well. But Lot chose that city specifically, and the Lord allowed that. So he and his daughters flee to that city, but then Lot is afraid to stay there, to dwell in there. Why would he be afraid? Well, there's a number of different reasons that could be that would make sense to me. After all, Zoar was one of the sinful cities, like Sodom and Gomorrah. God only spared it for Lot, not for any other reason. So Lot gets there and sees it's the same as Sodom. That could be one reason right there. He's worried that it will be destroyed, and maybe he and his girls wouldn't be spared this time, right? Because he chose to go there. It could be that they were so much like Sodom when he got to Zoar that they wanted to attack him and his daughters. The people of Sodom were certainly not shy about attacking those guys or wanting to attack those guys. So that could be part of it. It could be that they rejected him. They didn't want him to, like he was sitting at the gates in Sodom and judging. They didn't want him to be there for that reason. So there's a number of reasons he could have been afraid to stay in Zoar. There could be something I'm not thinking of even, but that was the things that came to my mind. The good reasons why he would be afraid to stay there. So for any or all of these reasons, he chooses to leave, go to the mountains, and live in a cave. So if we look at what Lot is doing, he's continually making bad choices. God told him originally to flee to the mountains, and he says, no, I want to go to the city. So God makes that happen for him. But then he gets there and he finds, for whatever reason, take your pick, finds that, yeah, I'm better off in the mountains. And he takes his daughters and goes to the mountains. So right, okay. So he chose to have his family there as well as his daughters were. I didn't say that. I didn't get that right. Okay. He chose to live in Sodom originally, okay? Even though their sin bothered him. Peter mentions that their sin bothered Lot, okay? So he chose to live there with them, even with that, and he chose to have his family there as well. His daughters were even betrothed to a couple of guys in Sodom. So these men did not take him seriously. He did not have any influence with them. And so Lot's account is just filled with his own mistakes of doing these different things. Not that he didn't have necessarily good intentions in trying to bring about some good change, but this is a lesson even for us. When we follow the Lord, we need to make sure that we're making decisions based on what God teaches us in his word. When God plainly tells us to do something, we need to do that. And when he plainly tells us not to, we need to not do that. But we don't need to bargain with God. We don't know better than God. When God gives us an action or something we need to do, that's for our betterment. So what we want is not better for us than what God has for us. And Lot was not understanding that. So we don't want to learn the hard way and go through our lives like this, choosing, we need to choose to follow the Lord without all the mistakes, without all that. Now the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come in to us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Now here we see the influence of Sodom and their promiscuity and all that with Lot's daughters. They have a problem. Their future husbands are dead, or their betrothed are dead. And for some reason, I guess they assume, or they're afraid and think they will never find anyone else in the world, which I don't quite get that, but okay. It seems ridiculous. But they're young, and maybe they're just impatient. But you'll notice God did not say that. This is what the older girl said. This is what she said. So she has a plan. And I just want us to see the issues of this plan here. In their situation, they were just afraid of never having a family at all. They want to follow the kind of actions they've seen or been exposed to and been around in Sodom. So, did Lot fail to teach them about God? Maybe. Seems like he didn't really teach them the principles they needed, and having them in Sodom allowed a lot of bad influences on them. So it happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, "Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. So notice how they're doing this. They're doing this very deceptively. They're using trickery on their father, so they know it's wrong. Obviously, they know this is wrong. They know Lot would not purposefully be involved in this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to basically get him drunk. But to a large degree, too, this is that influence from Sodom from being there so long. So they did this, even though it would have not been something he would have normally done. And again, the lesson for us is to not be joined with the world, not to be so influenced by other people's sin that we allow it to corrupt us or our family. We must live in the world, but we need to remain untainted or unspotted from it. Do not stay so close or involved in the world that it can or that it does corrupt you. Stay on guard, be alert. And remember this from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 33 and 34. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. Awake to righteousness and do not sin, for some do not have the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. The world is really our mission. They're our mission field, if you want to think of it that way. It's where we work for the Lord, but the world is not where we choose to hang out and spend a lot of time, if that makes sense to you, if you understand. The world or society is not who we follow and emulate. We should be following and emulating Jesus. So we don't want to immerse ourselves in the world. We can't be a friend of the world. John warns us of that. Love the people, help the people, share the gospel, but we can't join them in all those things, all those worldly things. So if we continue in our verses here, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. That's how I'm going to say it. I don't know if that's correct, but we're just going to say Ben-Ami, okay? He is the father of the people of Ammon, the Ammonites, to this day. One thing to briefly notice here in all that we've just read about here with these daughters, God is never worried about relating sexual events to us. He doesn't try to obscure that. He tries to make everything clear for us. Now, he doesn't get vulgar about it or gross about it, but he does let us know these things happen. So he speaks pretty plainly about it without being lewd or risque or anything like that. So many times people think and say that sex was the forbidden fruit in the garden, but that's just not so. God would have said so if that were the case. He had already told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, and that's how we're fruitful and multiply. There is no other way. So we're not doing like the amoeba. We don't split or anything like that. So it's just kind of silly the way people look at that. So God tells us instead that there was this tree with fruit, and he told them not to eat it. It's that plain and simple. And he's being plain. This is not some weird symbolic thing. He's just being plain about it in Genesis. And so when they broke that rule, they learned to be ashamed and to feel guilt for their evil action. And this was that knowledge of good and evil, of obedience and disobedience. So I just wanted to remind us of this. For some reason, I'd heard somebody recently talking about that, and it just drives me crazy. So I just want to remind us all, when we hear that type of thing, that's incorrect. We don't want anybody to be fooled or deceived. Because if you can be fooled about all these things in Genesis, if you can be deceived here and don't understand Genesis, then you're going to have a harder time in the rest of the Bible understanding it. Because it all builds off of Genesis. All right, so now we read that the daughters were successful. They both had a child. Okay, the people of both these children become enemies of Israel. So again, sin can have a far-reaching consequence and impact that not even intended. These girls were not intended this type of thing, but this is what happens. Now, while these people are technically, they're Lot's people, the Israelites are Abraham's people, technically they're connected in a family way, but even though they're related, they do not have a covenant with God. Israel has the covenant with God, right? Abraham has it, and then Israel has it. So let's look at these people. The Moab or Moabites. Now, Moab means from father or as from her father, which that kind of implies the incest, right? Or just basically says it. The Moabites have conflicts with Israel. If you remember when they're going to the Promised Land, they're refused passage on the road by the Moabites. The Moabites, I should have put the king's name down. Anyway, they hire Balaam to curse the Israelites. I think it was Balak. It was a weird name like that. Anyway, doesn't really matter that much. And then they did this seduction at Peor, and I've got some details here on these things, like they refused passage by the road, and this is when Israel neared Canaan, and just Moab denied them. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 23. They hired Balaam to curse the people in Numbers chapter 20, 22 through 24. And the Moabite women enticed the men of Israel into immorality and idolatry, and this brought a plague on the people, if you remember that. Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. However, while we say this about Moab, and we recognize that Moab was an enemy of Israel, Ruth shows that even enemies can come into God's fold. So God is not per se condemning all of them as individuals. He did not like them as an enemy of Israel, of course. Israel was his chosen people. But individually, they could still come to God if they wanted to. Ruth is an example of that. She decided to follow God and stay faithful, and she became a woman that's still admired today, and she's in the bloodline of Jesus. And if we look at the Ammonites, and Ben-Ami means son of my people. I guess, again, that kind of hints at the incest. Ammonites denotes that they are inbred. So there you go. They also had some conflicts with Israel. For 18 years, the Ammonites oppressed the Gileadite tribes, the tribes across the river, if I remember right. In Judges chapter 10, verses 7 through 9. And they worshipped Molech, which also goes by these other names of Milcom and Malcolm. And I may have misspelled Milcom there. That's just a typo. Yeah, it's actually C-O-M instead of C-U-M. But nonetheless, this was their religion that was full of like abominations, abominable practices, such as sacrificing their children, all those types of things. That was what they were, I would say they were into. That's what they did. Even Saul and David fought them at different times. However, on the other side of this, they have a special prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 6. After a certain time, I will restore the fortunes of the Ammonites. So they have a promise that would be a possibility for them to come to the Lord, just as everyone today can come to the Lord. But that was a special prophecy for them. Sometimes we look at the world as the people, as our enemies, and that's really the wrong way to look at that. That's not how we should see that. Like I said earlier, they are our mission. They are who we should be chasing, for lack of a better word at this moment. We should be sharing the gospel with them to try to bring them to the Lord. That's the whole idea. So they're the people we need to share that with. Now, again, the names imply the ancestral beginnings here for them. Let's see. All right. So, in closing, that's really the last of our lesson as far as this half of Genesis chapter 19. In closing, I want us to look at this. This is a good part of that gospel message that we need to be sharing with people. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 and 7. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. We always need to make sure that we're letting people know that there's a time coming when it will be too late, when it will not be possible to turn to the Lord. And we want folks to know that. And this is a message for all of us, really. If we have strayed in any way, if we need to get back with God, to get right with God, or if anyone would need to be baptized into Christ for salvation, God does abundantly pardon, just as he says here. He abundantly pardons anyone who needs that. And we would help you with that this evening if we can. If anyone here has a need, just please let it be known as we stand and sing.